because of this international attention that the film received, it's caused that there is no available digital copy of the film right now, so I'm unable to use the exact pictures and exact scenes that I'm going to speak about. I could only find a short extract from the film. I'm going to show it at some point to give you the feeling how the movie looks like, but unfortunately I have to, to describe the scenes in words and describe the sounds in words, which are an important part of my presentation. But I hope that you will have the chance to watch the film soon, and hopefully you can remember my presentation and put together the two parts. So anyway, there is a picture which is available, widely available on the World Wide Web, so I'm going to use it for a start. So the winner of the Grand Prix of this year's Cannes Film Festival, the Hungarian film Son of Saul, represents the Holocaust in a new and intriguing way. In my presentation, I will analyze the representational strategy of the film in the framework of haptic sensuality. Among other haptic strategies, I will focus on the use of sound in the creation of haptic environment. The sound designer of the film received the Vulcan Prize for technical achievement at the Cannes Film Festival. With the help of this analysis, I try to demonstrate that the film combines experimental formal strategies characteristic of intricate artistic cinema and high-impact effects often present in popular film forms. In my opinion, the successful combination of these strategies resulted in a high-impact art film. The film takes place at the Auschwitz concentration camp in 1944. Saul, the main character, is a member of the Sonderkommando. They are prisoners responsible for operating the crematorium, prepare the groups to be sent into the gas chamber, transport and burn the corpses. Saul finds moral survival upon trying to salvage from the flames the body of a boy that might or might not be his son. The film leaves this question open for interpretation. The film, on a basic narrative level, has a classical form. The opening situation is changed by a sudden turn of events. A young boy miraculously survives the gas chamber and had to be killed by a German officer. Saul decides to steal the body, find a rabbi, and give the boy a proper burial. The film follows the adventures of Saul, and at the end, the mission is half accomplished. The body that had been saved from the flames and was intended to be buried in earth finally finds its peace in water. Saul survives the mission, but does not survive the story. Laura Marks, in her book The Skin of the Film, proposes an erotic, embodied, and mimetic theory of representation that could be appropriate to many kinds of cinema, not only the intercultural works that the book itself describes. Marx contends that synesthesia and haptic visuality enables the viewer to experience cinema as multisensory. Although Marx concentrates primarily on the role of the proximal senses, that normally not considered important in connection with the audiovisual medium, such as touch, her argumentation helps to reconceptualize visuality in general and also the hierarchy that exists between image and sound in audiovisual media. According to Marx, as vision can be optic or haptic, so too hearing can perceive the environment in a more or less instrumental way. One might call haptic hearing that usually brief moment when all sounds present themselves to us undifferentiated before we make the choice of which sound are most important to attend to. Here Marx speaks about the approach toward listening, that hearing can be haptic, but it is also important that sound itself has proximal qualities. As Edward Brannigan notes, audible sounds comes from an object whose mechanical vibrations cause vibratory waves in a medium, as in air, water, flesh, or bone. Sound rubs against and within us. In general, for Marx, the importance of haptic sensuality and visuality lays in its ability to evoke memories, feelings, and content stored by the different senses and not describable by traditional ways of audiovisual representation. It seems adequate then to choose haptic strategies when trying to show something that is almost impossible to represent, the Holocaust. While Son of Saul uses the strategies of haptic visuality, it also emphasizes the importance of sound that already has a basic proximal quality and makes the overall perceptive experience even more sensually accentuated. I might say that the use of 35mm film stock also has a special meaning in this context. The film has been shot on actual material. Its existence is real in material terms. The film opens and ends with sounds without pictures. At the beginning, the screen is still dark when sounds of birds and the noise of a water stream can be heard. A little later, the film starts at a place that looks like a clearing in a forest. The film ends in the same forest, and after the last picture of a beautiful green and empty forest disappears from the screen, the darkness is filled with the noise of rain. And in my opinion, the noise of the rain gradually starts to resemble to the crackling of fire. It is important to note that this might be only my subjective feeling, since hearing is a more subjective sense than vision. Often it is more difficult to recognize phenomena based on its noise than based on its image. As Christian Metz notes, sound is an adjective while vision is a noun. When we see a physical object, he says, its identification is complete and all that could be added would be merely adjectival, as in a tall reading lamp. By contrast, when we hear a sound, the identification remains incomplete. A whistling sound still needs to be specified. The whistling of what thing, from where, because of what action. Otherwise, the rain versus fire interpretation of the closing sound is not entirely alien from the symbolism of the film. Saul wanted to save the body from fire and finally buried it in water. The prototypical form of haptic visuality described by Marx is also present in the film. In case of haptic visuality, the eyes function like organs of touch. Optical visuality depends on a separation between the viewing subject and the object. Haptic looking tends to move over the surface of its object rather than to plunge into illusionistic depth, not to distinguish from so much as to discern texture. It is more inclined to move than to focus, more inclined to gaze than to gaze. These haptic images are often blurred, what makes their recognition difficult. And Son of Saul opens with a picture that looks exactly like that. The first image is a greenish blur that fills the screen. After some time, it turns out that the picture is produced by shallow focus, and as the hero approaches the camera, finally his face will become sharp, while his surroundings remain relatively blurred. He is there to help with the freshly arrived new transport of people. Right after we see his face on the screen, he turns away to do his work. With this gesture, the film sets its cruising speed and style. We follow Saul throughout the film and mostly see his back in medium close-up. And now we should watch the excerpt. No?
Rokonod. Akkor is. Nincs rá szükséged. De a főnökének van. Hova valósi vagy?
Várj rá.
Ugyanolyan rab vagyok, mint te. Estek azt 5 percet, hogy egyedül lehess vele. De a végén ugyanúgy elég a többivel. Mi a neved?
Oszlander. Saul.
So, here also comes into play the chosen aspect ratio. The traditional 4:3 ratio is used to limit the visual information about the surroundings and fix the viewer's point of view to the narrowed down vision of Saul. The dominant shot type throughout the film is between medium close-up and close-up, and it almost never exceeds medium shot. There are several dramatically important shots, for example, the killing of the boy and the killing of the first rabbi Saul finds. These might be interpreted as wide shots. The constant use of shallow focus and the narrowing down of the field of vision works against optical vision in general throughout the film. Haptic vision is based on closeness, the elimination of distance, while optic vision maintains the distance, and distance allows the viewer to organize him or herself as an all-perceiving subject. The distance and optic vision, according to Marx, is connected to the question of mastery. It is a sort of instrumental vision that positions the thing seen as an object for knowledge and control. But in contrast, haptual visuality haptic visuality that is not merely cognitive but acknowledges its location in the body seems to escape the attribution of mastery. The repositioning of the audience by eliminating the all-perceiving position and the controlling knowledge makes them more vulnerable in the perceiving situation and makes the experience more effective. The viewer's suggested physical closeness to Saul makes the perceptive identification accentuated. Identification can be processed on the intellectual but also on the perceptual level. And Marx notes theories of embodied visuality acknowledge the presence of the body in the act of seeing, at the same time that they relinquish the illusory unity of the self. In embodied spectatorship, the senses and the intellect are not separate. The film's artistic strategy concerning embodied presence is clearly formulated in a dramatically important, highly symbolic moment. Throughout the film, we do not see any trace of emotions on the face of Saul. He seems to be emotionally dead. He does what he has to do, moves around like a machine, his body is constantly tossed around by his superiors. But there is a moment when he first left alone with the body of the dead boy. He sits on the bench beside the corpse and takes a really deep breath. We can hear the sound of the air entering his body. At this moment, he returns to be a living human being, still not one who is able to have feelings, but at least he is now a breathing, living man who might well be able to take on a mission. At that point, at that point in the film, the viewer already understands the relevance of a deep breath in this world. The narrow field of vision that we are constantly forced in together with Saul strengthen the feeling of being locked in a small place. Each moment when a film, after long sequences of close-ups, lets its viewer to look out into the space in a middle shot or in an almost wide shot, it has a physical effect. It feels as if the film lessens the grip on our chest and let us to take a deep breath. Haptic qualities that resist to intellectual and objective conceptualization have a connection with obscurity, uncertainty. Obscurity is one of the central concepts of Son of Saul that is present on many levels in the film. There is a highly symbolic, self-reflexive episode in the film. Saul, in order to further his personal mission, helps other prisoners who secretly try to make photographs about the concentration camp. One of them pretending to repair a broken lock on a door, while the other tries to make the photographs about what is happening in the courtyard. But suddenly, the wind blows the smoke into their direction, covers up the scene, and they are unable to take the picture. The smoke that reminds us the process of cremation at the same time blocks the vision of horror, makes it impossible to record it on photographs. The situation is mirroring the problems of representation that the film itself is wrestling with. The smoke in this scene is a narrative equivalent of the technical tools that is used by the film, such as the narrowness of vision created by the 4:3 aspect ratio and the shallow focus. Another scene, somewhat similar to the smoke scene, takes place at the riverbank. The members of the Sonderkommando are ordered to shovel into the river the ashes coming from the crematorium. It is deeply haunting as ashes fill the air. Here, the fine powder does not cover anything, since there is nothing to hide there visually, but the whole scene is composed as if it would be possible for us to breathe in the flying light but also horrid substance. Obscurity and uncertainty is also present on the soundtrack. I have already mentioned that the sound of rain at the end of the film that could be mistaken as crackling of fire. The film also uses dialogues in a certain obscure way. Most of the scenes take place in chaotic, multilingual, sonic environment where sounds are off-screen and signal the horrifying but mostly invisible events. At the same time, dialogues between characters that seem to be crucial to understand the story are muffled, almost impossible to hear or understand. This level of obscurity probably is not always detectable for non-Hungarian speakers because the subtitles solve this problem for them, but based on my repeated listening experience of the film in normal cinema conditions, this problem is intended by the filmmakers. Language and verbal communication lost its relevance. Only the actions remain important. In classical cinema, narration, the filmic realization of the plot, is usually that to which all other parameters like editing, camera work, and primarily sound are subordinated. Son of Saul has a classic narrative structure. The hero has a mission, and in order to accomplish the mission, he has to face obstacles. The strong basic structure holds together the film, while many supposedly subordinated parameters work against clarity. According to Laura Marks, haptic visuality in general weakens narration. The haptic image forces the viewer to contemplate the image itself instead of being pulled into narrative. Also, the restricted visual field of shots makes it harder for the viewer to reconstruct the diegetic world. The dialogue sometimes unclear even in crucial moments and also kept to the minimum throughout the film. And acting in general works against the narrative as well. Saul's acting is especially expressionless. That might represent the mental state of the character, but works against the recognition of his motives. For example, for me, one of the main reasons why I believe that the boy is not his son is that he remains completely expressionless even when he first sees the boy, and also at the moment when the boy is strangled in front of him. It might be interpreted that his apathy is so severe that he is unable to express emotions anymore, although this tiny acting detail has fully convinced me that Saul had not found his son. He only interprets the miracle of the boy surviving the gas chamber as a sign for him to do something in order to save his own humanity. Saul's expressionless acting causes other narrative uncertainties as well. For example, about a woman who he meets during one of his errands in the camp. She might even be his wife, but it is impossible to guess because of the expressionless acting. Viewers' identification is not supported by the acting of the leading characters. Rather, the film grabs the viewer sensually and stimulates bodily identification. In this very dense sonic environment, sound's haptic qualities also support identification. As Laura Marks notes, in these settings, aural boundaries between body and word may feel indistinct. The rustle of the trees may mingle with the sound of my breathing, or conversely, the booming music may inhabit my chest cavity and move my body from the inside. Although in Son of Saul, it is not the music that inhabits our chest, there is no music in the film, but it is the shouts of prison guards and the screams of death. The above analyzed accentuated use of haptic sensuality could signal an artistically adventurous, even experimental film that is far from mainstream styles. But Son of Saul uses these artistic techniques for creating an intense, suspense-driven film that employs the strategies of genre cinema, especially such body genres as the horror. The narrow visual field, for example, is a stylistic tool often used by horror movies to heighten the tension and suggest that the threatening force might be very close to us, right outside the narrow frame. The intensified sensuality of Son of Saul also brings up the question of the so-called immersion cinema. Recent changes in projection technology and theater architecture focus on the importance of the physical and kinesthetic experience of the spectator immersed in high-fidelity audiovisual technologies. These technologies can be characterized as attempts to create experiences in a more and more sensorily believable way, even if such experiences are not possible in our real world. This approach concentrates on the technological side of the question, such as the invention of new technologies, new technologies of 3D recording and projection, improvement of sound system and screening formats. The difference between the sensual immersion of Son of Saul and the blockbusters of immersion cinema might be summarized in connection with the obscurity uncertainty discussed above. Immersion cinema aims to create a perfectly narrativized perspective and a psychological realism, while Son of Saul creates a perceptual realism that sometimes lacks perfection but seems to tear the texture of fiction and gives the impression that we are able to witness the real. And in witnessing the real, sound plays a peculiar role. As Christian Metz notes, auditory aspects, providing that the recording is well done, undergo no appreciable loss in relation to the corresponding sound in the real world. In principle, nothing distinguishes a gunshot heard in a film from a gunshot heard on the street. And for Metz, a particular film sound When believed by an auditor to be typical of such sound, the original acoustic situation that created it during filming is not relevant. In this sense, nothing distinguishes the death screams in Son of Saul from the death screams heard in the gas chambers.